The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with desperate energy as representatives from 12 species gathered around the holographic display showing their dying fleets. Admiral Zethkar of the Vorthon Empire slammed his four-armed fist against the crystalline table, his blue skin darkening with rage. 17 sectors lost in 3 rotations, he growled, his translator crackling with static. The Devourers advance faster than we can retreat. At this rate, the core worlds will fall within 50 rotations. Commander Lisa of the Ethereal Collective floated silently above her designated space, her translucent form shimmering with anxiety. Our psychic networks report the same across all fronts. The enemy adapts to every strategy, every weapon, every defense we deploy. It's as if they learn from our very thoughts. The holographic display updated automatically, showing red zones spreading like infection across the galaxy map. What had started as isolated attacks in the outer rim had become a full-scale invasion that threatened to consume everything in its path. The Devourers, as they had come to be known, were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They consumed technology, absorbed energy, and corrupted organic matter with equal efficiency. Their ships were living nightmares of twisted metal and pulsing flesh, growing stronger with every battle they won. Traditional weapons barely slowed them down, and captured technology only made them more dangerous. The Kethamori defense grid held for exactly 47 minutes, reported General Vex of the Silicon Confederation, his mechanical voice devoid of emotion but heavy with implication. Population, 43 billion. Survivors, 0. The entire system is now changed. A collective shudder ran through the assembled beings. The Kethamori had been considered impregnable, their planetary defenses legendary throughout the galaxy. If they could fall so quickly, nowhere was truly safe. High Counselor Ralmoth, eldest among the Eternal Minds, projected his consciousness into the chamber from his distant homeworld. His ancient voice carried the weight of millennia as he spoke. In all my cycles of existence, through wars that shaped galaxies and conflicts that birthed stars, I have never witnessed such complete devastation. The Devourers do not merely conquer, they fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. The display shifted to show intercepted transmissions from Devourer territory. The images were difficult to process, showing landscapes that defied physics, cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and creatures that had once been familiar species twisted into forms that hurt to perceive. Our best xenobiologists believe the Devourers originate from outside our dimensional framework, continued Ralmoth. They bring with them laws of physics that conflict with our own, rewriting reality as they expand their influence. This is not merely an invasion. It is an ontological assault on existence itself. Ambassador Kree of the Trade Federation nervously clicked her mandibles. The economic implications alone are catastrophic. 17 major trade routes completely severed, 43 colony worlds under siege, and our largest manufacturing centers either destroyed or converted. Even if we somehow repel this invasion, the infrastructure damage will take centuries to repair. If we survive that long, muttered Captain Drix of the Border Patrol, his scarred features grim with experience. I've seen what happens to captured crews. The lucky ones die quickly. The others, they become something else. Something that serves the Devourers willingly. The chamber fell silent as each representative contemplated the implications. They had thrown everything they had at the Devourers, quantum bombs that could crack planets, reality anchors that stabilized space-time, and psychic weapons that could drive entire fleets insane. Nothing worked for more than a few battles before the enemy adapted and overcame. What about the Terrans? Asked Sub-Commander Yeth of the Deep Space Explorers, her voice barely above a whisper. They've remained notably absent from our war councils. Admiral Zethkar snorted dismissively. The humans? They're practically primitives. Their technology is centuries behind ours, their military doctrine is crude at best, and their understanding of advanced physics is laughably simple. They still use chemical propulsion for some of their vessels. Nevertheless, Ralmoth interjected thoughtfully, they have refused all our offers of technological assistance and declined to join the unified defense effort. Intelligence reports suggest they are mobilizing their own forces, but for what purpose remains unclear. Commander Lisa's form flickered with confusion. Our psychic scans of human space return unusual results. There's something there, something massive, but it's shielded by technologies we don't recognize. Crude technologies, yet somehow effective against our most sophisticated sensors. The holographic display updated again, this time showing the current positions of all military forces in the galaxy. The human territories appeared as a small blue cluster in one corner of the map, seemingly insignificant compared to the vast red zones controlled by the Devourers or the scattered green areas still under Council protection. 47 worlds, scoffed General Vex. Their entire civilization spans 47 worlds, and half of those are barely habitable mining colonies. What could they possibly contribute to a war of this magnitude? Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Kree, they have chosen to focus on evacuation rather than resistance. It would be the logical choice for such a small civilization. No, Ralmoth said slowly, his ancient consciousness reaching across space to touch the edges of human territory. They are building something large. The gravitational distortions around their core systems suggest massive construction projects, possibly military in nature. Captain Drix leaned forward in his chair. With respect, High Counselor, even if they built 1,000 dreadnoughts, what difference would it make? The Devourers have corrupted or destroyed fleets 10 times that size. True, admitted Ralmoth, but there is something about human psychology that intrigues me. Unlike other species, they do not seem to fear the Devourers. Fear, yes, but not the existential terror that has paralyzed so many of our forces. They see this invasion as just another war to be won. The chamber's environmental systems hummed quietly as the representatives considered this observation. Fear had indeed become their greatest weakness. The Devourers fed on despair and uncertainty, growing stronger as their enemies grew more desperate. Their primitive nature might actually be an advantage, mused Commander Lisa. Their crude technology cannot be easily corrupted or adapted by the Devourers because it operates on principles so simple and direct that there's nothing to subvert. Simple and direct, repeated Admiral Zethkar thoughtfully. Perhaps we have overcomplicated our approach. Our weapons are marvels of engineering. But that very complexity makes them vulnerable to Devourer influence. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from the forward observation post in the neutral zone. The image that appeared showed Captain Voss, a grizzled veteran whose ship had been monitoring Devourer movements for the past several rotations. Council, we have movement in Sector 7 Alpha, Voss reported, his voice tight with tension. Massive Devourer fleet forming up for what appears to be a final assault on the core worlds. Estimated time to arrival, 36 hours. The holographic display immediately updated to show the approaching threat. The Devourer fleet was enormous, easily 3 times larger than anything they had fielded before. Thousands of ships moved in perfect coordination, their organic hulls pulsing with absorbed energy from countless conquered worlds. 36 hours, whispered Ambassador Kree. Is that enough time to evacuate the core worlds? Negative, replied General Vex after quickly calculating the logistics. We would need at least 72 hours to evacuate even the priority populations, and that assumes the evacuation fleets aren't destroyed during the process. Admiral Zethkar stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. Then we make our final stand at the core worlds. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we have left. If this is to be the end of galactic civilization, We'll ensure the Devourers pay dearly for their victory." "Wait," interrupted Ralmoth, his consciousness suddenly focusing intently on something beyond their perception. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from human space. Something is happening." The display automatically shifted to show the human territories, and what they saw defied explanation. Massive objects were emerging from the space around Earth and its colonies, objects so large that they registered as minor gravitational anomalies on the sensors. "By the void," breathed Captain Drix. "What are those things?" The objects were clearly artificial, but their scale was unprecedented. Each one was easily the size of a small moon, and their crude, angular construction was unlike anything in the Council's databases. They moved slowly but with obvious purpose, accelerating toward the edge of human space. Analysis indicates they are constructed primarily of iron, titanium, and other basic metals, reported General Vex, his mechanical voice carrying a note of confusion. The construction techniques appear to be primitive industrial methods scaled up to astronomical proportions. Commander Lysa attempted to scan the massive objects with her psychic abilities, but the results were frustrating. There's something about them that resists deep scanning. Not active shielding, but rather, it's as if they're so simple and direct in their construction that there's nothing complex enough to analyze. "Are they ships?" asked Ambassador Kree. "Unknown," replied Ralmoth. "But given their size and the timing of their emergence, I suspect the humans have been preparing their own response to the Devourer threat." The representatives watched in fascination as more of the massive objects appeared throughout human space. Dozens, then hundreds, each one slightly different in design, but sharing the same basic characteristics of overwhelming size and brutally simple construction. "Should we attempt to contact the humans?" suggested Subcommander Yeath. Before anyone could answer, a new transmission appeared in the chamber. The face that materialized was distinctly human, weathered and scarred, wearing what appeared to be a simple military uniform. When he spoke, his words were translated into the common galactic tongue, but his meaning was unmistakably clear. "Galactic Council, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We've been monitoring your communications and are aware of the approaching Devourer fleet. We want you to know that help is coming." Admiral Zethkar stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "Human Admiral, while we appreciate your sentiment, the approaching enemy fleet numbers in the thousands. What assistance could your 47 worlds possibly provide?" Admiral Chen smiled grimly. "Admiral, you're thinking in terms of ships and fleets. We've been thinking in terms of weight and momentum. The Devourers may be adaptable and sophisticated, but we've learned something important about them during our observations." "Which is?" asked Ralmoth. "They've never faced anything truly simple before. Every civilization they've encountered has tried to outthink them, outmaneuver them, or out-sophisticate them. But sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective." The display updated to show the human objects more clearly. They were indeed ships, but unlike any vessels the Council had ever seen. Instead of sleek curves and elegant lines, these were massive blocks of metal and machinery, bristling with what appeared to be conventional weapons and driven by enormous engine clusters. "What exactly are those?" demanded Admiral Zethkar. Admiral Chen's smile widened. "Those, Admiral, are humanity's answer to an unstoppable force. We call them dreadnoughts, and each one mounts more firepower than your entire battle fleet. They're slow, they're crude, and they're absolutely unstoppable once they get moving." "Impossible," scoffed General Vex. "The energy requirements alone for vessels of that size would exceed the output of entire star systems." "You're right," agreed Admiral Chen. "Which is why each dreadnought carries its own power source. We've had to get creative with our engineering solutions." As if responding to her words, the sensors detected something that made the gathered representatives gasp in shock. Each of the massive human vessels was powered by what appeared to be a controlled stellar fusion reaction, essentially a contained star providing unlimited energy. "They've built mobile star fortresses," whispered Commander Lisa, her translucent form flickering with amazement. "Not star fortresses," corrected Admiral Chen. "Siege engines. The Devourers want to consume and convert everything they encounter. But it's hard to consume something when it's shooting back with the force of a solar flare." The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. While the Council had been trying to match the Devourer's sophistication, humanity had taken the opposite approach. Instead of complex weapons that could be adapted or corrupted, they had built simple, overwhelming force that couldn't be reasoned with or subverted. "How many of these dreadnoughts do you have?" asked Admiral Zethkar, his skepticism giving way to something like hope. "Currently, about 300 are operational, with more coming online every hour. We've been building them for the past 2 years, ever since we first detected the Devourer presence in our galaxy. 300 ships, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the Council fleets. The tactical implications were staggering, but more importantly, it represented something the galaxy hadn't seen in rotations, a force the Devourers had never encountered before. "Admiral Chen," said Ralmoth formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I request that humanity join our defensive efforts. Your assistance could tip the balance of this war." Admiral Chen nodded gravely. "High Counselor, with respect, we're not joining your defensive efforts. We're launching an offensive. The Devourer fleet heading toward your core worlds has just painted a target on itself. We're going to hit them with everything we've got." The display showed the human dreadnoughts beginning to move in earnest, their massive bulk slowly but steadily accelerating toward the approaching Devourer fleet. Each ship trailed a wake of distorted space-time as their oversized engines pushed them forward with irresistible momentum. "This is unprecedented," muttered Ambassador Kree. "No one has successfully launched an offensive against the Devourers." "No one has had the right tools before," replied Admiral Chen. "Sometimes you need a scalpel. Sometimes you need a hammer. In this case, we brought the biggest hammers we could build." As the human fleet moved toward its intercept course with the Devourers, the gathered Council representatives felt something they hadn't experienced in rotations: genuine hope. Perhaps this war wasn't lost after all. Perhaps these crude, simple humans had found the answer that had eluded the galaxy's greatest minds. The war was about to take a very different turn. 28 hours later, the intercepted communications from the approaching Devourer fleet told a story that chilled the blood of every council member. The enemy was no longer advancing in perfect formation. Their transmissions, translated through captured communication arrays, spoke of confusion and something approaching concern. "Unknown. Massive objects detected," came the alien whispers through the static. "Configuration unlike standard prey fleet formations. Scale parameters exceed tactical databases. Analysis inconclusive." Admiral Zethkar found himself pacing the observation deck of his flagship, watching the long-range sensors track both fleets as they approached their inevitable collision. The human dreadnoughts moved like slow avalanches through space, their crude but overwhelming presence impossible to ignore. "They're actually doing it," he muttered to himself. "Those mad primitives are actually charging straight into the largest Devourer fleet ever assembled." Captain Drick stood beside him, his scarred face reflecting equal parts amazement and terror. "Sir, the energy readings from those human ships are off our measurement scales. Each one is putting out more power than our entire fleet combined." The main display showed the two forces drawing closer. The Devourer fleet had begun to spread out, attempting to envelop the approaching human vessels in their standard tactical formation. What they couldn't account for was the sheer size and firepower of their opponents. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," announced the communications officer. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen, but she looked different now. Gone was the diplomatic politeness from their previous conversation. Instead, her expression carried the cold determination of someone about to engage in the most important battle of her life. Council Fleet Commanders, this is Admiral Chen. We are about to engage the Devourer force in 17 minutes. I strongly recommend that your ships maintain a safe distance of at least 50,000 kilometers from the combat zone. 50,000 kilometers? Repeated Captain Drix in disbelief. Standard engagement range is barely 5,000. What kind of weapons are they planning to use? Admiral Chen seemed to hear the question despite the communication delay. The kind that don't discriminate between friend and foe, Captain. When you're swinging a hammer the size of a moon, everything around you becomes a nail. The transmission cut out, leaving the Council fleet to watch from a distance as the human dreadnoughts approached their target. Long-range sensors showed the Devourers attempting to analyze their opponents, launching scout ships and probe attacks to test their defenses. What happened next defied everything the galaxy knew about space combat. The lead human dreadnought, a massive rectangular fortress bristling with weapon emplacements, opened fire at a range of nearly 100,000 kilometers. Instead of the precise energy beams or quantum torpedoes favored by advanced civilizations, it launched what appeared to be simple kinetic projectiles. Except these projectiles were the size of skyscrapers and moving at relativistic speeds. The first salvo struck the Devourer scout ships with devastating effect. The enemy vessels, designed to absorb and adapt to energy weapons, simply ceased to exist when struck by several thousand tons of accelerated matter. There was no flash of energy to absorb, no complex technology to corrupt, just the fundamental physics of mass times velocity. "By the void!" whispered Commander Lysa, her translucent form shimmering with shock. "They're using kinetic bombardment on a stellar scale." The Devourer fleet immediately began evasive maneuvers, but their opponents had anticipated this. The human dreadnoughts spread out into a loose formation and began saturating space with thousands of relativistic projectiles. Each shot was carefully calculated to arrive at a predicted intercept point, turning the entire combat zone into a three-dimensional minefield of accelerated death. "The humans are treating this like an artillery bombardment," observed General Vex, his mechanical voice carrying notes of admiration and horror. "They're not trying to outmaneuver or outwit the enemy. They're simply overwhelming them with superior firepower." The Devourers, for their part, were learning why their previous victims had never tried this approach. Their ships began to glow with absorbed energy as they attempted to convert the kinetic impacts into usable power, but the sheer scale of the bombardment was beyond their capacity to process. Ships that had survived quantum bombs and reality weapons were being torn apart by what amounted to very large, very fast rocks. "Incredible," breathed Admiral Zethkar. "The Devourers can't adapt to pure kinetic force because there's nothing to adapt to. It's just raw physics." The battle was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of the elegant dance of energy weapons and defensive screens, it resembled an ancient siege where attackers hurled stones at fortress walls. Except the stones were building-sized projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed, and the fortress walls were living ships that screamed as they died. The human dreadnoughts pressed their advantage with methodical precision. As the Devourers closed to conventional engagement range, the massive human ships revealed their secondary armament. Weapons that the Council had dismissed as primitive chemical propulsion turned out to be something far more dangerous. "Are those missile tubes?" asked Subcommander Yeath, staring at the sensor readings in disbelief. "Not missiles," corrected Captain Drix grimly. "Those are mass drivers. Each one can launch a projectile the size of a cruiser." The human ships opened up with their secondary batteries, filling space with a continuous stream of hypervelocity projectiles. The Devourers found themselves caught in a killing field where every cubic meter of space contained multiple high-speed impacts waiting to happen. But the Devourers were not helpless prey. They began to adapt their tactics, using their smaller ships as shields while their larger vessels attempted to close distance for boarding actions. Several Devourer ships managed to reach ramming distance with the human dreadnoughts, their organic hulls preparing to merge with and consume their opponents. This proved to be a fatal mistake. The moment a Devourer ship made physical contact with a human dreadnought, the massive human vessel revealed another unpleasant surprise. Hidden beneath their crude armor plating were electromagnetic field generators that could channel the output of their stellar power cores directly into anything touching their hull. The attacking Devourer ship found itself trying to consume a vessel that was essentially a weaponized star. The bioorganic entity that formed the core of the enemy vessel simply couldn't process that much raw energy. Instead of being absorbed and converted, it was instantly vaporized along with a significant portion of the surrounding Devourer fleet. "They've turned their entire ship into a contact weapon," observed General Vex with something approaching professional respect. "Anyone who tries to board them gets electrocuted by the equivalent of a solar flare." The tide of battle began to shift as the Devourers realized they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered. Their adaptation mechanisms, so effective against sophisticated technology, were useless against weapons that operated on the most basic principles of physics. They couldn't corrupt kinetic energy, couldn't subvert electromagnetic fields, and couldn't reason with opponents who seemed to view this as just another engineering problem to be solved. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communications channel, calm despite the ongoing carnage around her ship. "Council observers, you might want to retreat to a safer distance. We're about to test our primary weapons." "Primary weapons?" repeated Admiral Zethkar in shock. "What they've been using so far are their secondary armaments." The answer came in the form of massive energy buildups aboard each human dreadnought. Sensors detected power readings that should have been impossible for ships of any size to generate, let alone contain safely. The stellar fusion cores that powered each vessel began to cycle energy through what appeared to be a single, enormous weapon system. "Energy signatures indicate some form of particle beam weapon," reported the tactical officer. "But the power levels, they're channeling their entire stellar output through a single emitter array." The first human dreadnought to fire its main gun provided a demonstration that would be remembered for millennia. A beam of coherent particles, powered by a controlled star and focused through kilometers of acceleration chambers, lanced out across space to strike the largest Devourer vessel. The enemy ship, a massive bioorganic fortress that had previously been considered invulnerable, simply evaporated. Not destroyed, not damaged, but completely converted to component atoms by a focused beam of stellar fury. The beam continued past its target to strike 3 more ships behind it, each one meeting the same fate. "They've weaponized stellar output," whispered Commander Lysa, her form flickering with awe and terror. "Each ship is essentially a mobile star cannon." The remaining human dreadnoughts opened fire in sequence, their main guns carving through the Devourer fleet like heated blades through fabric. Each shot represented the focused output of a star, directed with the precision of master engineers and the determination of a species that refused to accept defeat. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just hours before, began to disintegrate under the sustained bombardment. Their ships couldn't adapt to weapons that operated on such a fundamental level, couldn't corrupt technology that was essentially concentrated physics, and couldn't consume energy that was being delivered faster than they could process it. But even as their fleet died around them, the Devourers revealed why they had conquered half the galaxy. The survivors began to change tactics entirely, abandoning their ships and attempting to assault the human vessels directly in their pure energy forms. This proved to be another miscalculation. The humans had observed enough Devourer attacks to know about their ability to exist as energy beings. Each dreadnought was equipped with what their technical specifications called ghost shields, electromagnetic barriers tuned to disrupt energy patterns that didn't match specific parameters. The attacking Devourer entities found themselves trapped between the ship's hull and an energy field that prevented them from maintaining coherent form. Unable to penetrate the defenses and unable to retreat, they dissipated harmlessly into space. "Fascinating," observed Ralmoth over the communications channel. "The humans have created defenses specifically designed to counter energy-based life forms. How did they know to prepare for such attacks?" Admiral Chen's response carried a note of grim satisfaction. "High Counselor, we've been watching this war for 2 years. We saw what happened to the species that tried to fight the Devourers with sophisticated technology. We decided to try the opposite approach." The battle was essentially over, though cleanup operations continued for several more hours. The massive Devourer fleet that had threatened to end galactic civilization was reduced to scattered debris and dissipating energy clouds. Not a single human dreadnought had been destroyed, though several showed minor damage from impacts that would have crippled conventional vessels. As the human fleet began to reorganize and assess damage, the Council representatives found themselves grappling with a new reality. The war that had seemed hopeless just days before had suddenly become winnable, thanks to the intervention of the species they had dismissed as primitives. "Admiral Chen," called Admiral Zethkar over the communication channel, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I offer our deepest gratitude. Your intervention may have saved our entire civilization." "Don't thank us yet," replied Admiral Chen grimly. "This was just one fleet. Intelligence reports indicate there are at least a dozen more Devourer formations of similar size throughout the galaxy. And now they know we exist." The implications of her words settled over the gathered observers like a cold weight. The humans had revealed their capabilities, which meant the Devourers would begin adapting their strategies to counter these new threats. The war was far from over. "What are your intentions now?" asked Ralmoth. Admiral Chen's expression hardened with resolve. "High Counselor, we're going to end this war, not by defending against the Devourers, but by carrying the fight to them. We've spent 2 years building an offensive fleet specifically designed to counter their advantages. It's time to put that fleet to use." "You're planning to invade Devourer territory?" asked Commander Lisa in amazement. "Not invade," corrected Admiral Chen. "Exterminate. The Devourers have shown they cannot coexist with other forms of life. They consume, corrupt, and destroy everything they encounter. The only way to ensure galactic peace is to ensure they no longer exist." The chamber fell silent as the representatives contemplated the audacity of what the humans were proposing. No species had ever successfully launched an offensive into Devourer territory. The very idea seemed like suicide. But then again, no species had ever brought star-powered weapons to bear against the enemy. Perhaps what seemed like suicide was actually the first real hope the galaxy had seen in years. "If you're serious about this offensive," said Admiral Zethkar slowly, "the Council fleets will support you however we can." Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since the battle began. "Admiral, we appreciate the offer, but your conventional fleets wouldn't survive in Devourer space. However, there is something you can do to help us." "Name it." "Help us build more dreadnoughts. We have the designs and the knowledge, but we need resources and industrial capacity. Every ship we can build increases our chances of ending this war permanently." The Council representatives exchanged glances. Understanding the magnitude of what was being asked, the humans were offering to share their devastating technology in exchange for the industrial might to produce more of these incredible weapons. "It will require the combined resources of every member species," warned Ambassador Kree. "The energy and materials needed for construction will be worth it if it means the difference between extinction and survival," finished Admiral Zethkar firmly. "Admiral Chen, you have the full support of the Galactic Council. Whatever resources you need, wherever you need them, they're yours. As the human fleet began its journey back toward friendly territory, the Council representatives found themselves facing a new chapter in galactic history. The war against the Devourers was about to transform from a desperate defensive action into an offensive campaign unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The primitives from the small blue world had just shown everyone how to fight a war that could actually be won. 6 months after the first engagement, the industrial heart of the galaxy had been transformed into the largest military production facility in recorded history. Entire star systems had been converted to shipyards, their planets stripped of raw materials to feed the insatiable hunger of dreadnought construction. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the command deck of the TDF Indomitable, watching through reinforced viewports as the latest batch of human-designed warships prepared for their maiden voyage. Each vessel represented the combined industrial might of multiple species, built according to human specifications, but enhanced with technologies from across the galaxy. "Final count, Admiral," reported Captain Torres, her aide-de-camp. 1,473 dreadnoughts operational and ready for deployment. Another 600 in final construction phases. Chen nodded grimly. The numbers were impressive, but intelligence reports from deep space suggested they would need every ship they could build. The Devourers had not been idle during the months of preparation. Their territory had expanded to encompass nearly half the galaxy, and worse, they had begun adapting their technology in response to the human threat. "What's the status of the Council fleets?" asked Chen. "Admiral Zethkar's forces have completed integration training with our tactical systems. General Vex has upgraded his Silicon Confederation vessels with kinetic weapon packages based on our designs. Commander Lisa's ethereal collective has developed some kind of psychic early warning network that can detect Devourer movements across dimensional barriers." The integration had been surprisingly smooth, considering the vast differences in technology and tactics between species. The key had been the human insistence on simplicity. Rather than trying to merge complex technologies, they had focused on basic principles that any species could understand and implement. "And the new weapon systems?" Captain Torres consulted her datapad with visible excitement. "The experimental planet crackers passed all field tests. Each Titan-class dreadnought now carries enough firepower to sterilize an entire world if necessary. The engineers estimate we could destroy a planet's biosphere in under 12 hours. Chen felt no satisfaction at the destructive capability her species had unleashed upon the galaxy. The planet crackers were weapons of last resort, designed for a single purpose: to deny the Devourers any possibility of adaptation or regeneration. If they encountered a world that had been fully converted to Devourer territory, there would be no attempt at liberation, only complete sterilization. "Reports from the deep reconnaissance missions?" she asked. "Troubling," admitted Captain Torres. "The Devourers have been busy. They've constructed what our analysts are calling adaptation factories throughout their territory. Massive installations that appear to be studying our weapons and developing countermeasures." The holographic display activated automatically, showing the latest intelligence from the border regions. The images were difficult to process, showing Devourer installations that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their twisted architecture defying conventional understanding of space and time. "They've built copies of our kinetic weapons," continued Torres. "Crude copies, but functional. More concerning, they appear to be developing some form of matter disruption field that could neutralize our projectile attacks." Chen studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. This was the scenario they had feared most: the Devourers learning to counter human advantages through the same adaptation mechanisms that had defeated every other species. "Any word from the deep strike teams?" Lieutenant Commander Park's infiltration unit successfully placed quantum beacons in 17 Devourer systems. The data they transmitted before losing contact indicates the enemy has been constructing what appears to be a megastructure in their core territories. What kind of megastructure? Captain Torres hesitated before answering. The preliminary analysis suggests it's some form of dimensional gateway. Our xenobiologists believe the Devourers may be attempting to summon reinforcements from their dimension of origin. The implications were staggering. If the Devourers could bring fresh forces from outside their galaxy, the war would become unwinnable regardless of how many dreadnoughts humanity could build. Every tactical advantage they had gained would be meaningless against an enemy with unlimited reinforcements. How long until this gateway becomes operational? Best estimates suggest 6 to 8 weeks, assuming they maintain current construction rates. Chen felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. 6 weeks to launch an offensive that would either end the war permanently or see the complete extinction of galactic civilization. There would be no second chances, no opportunity to retreat and regroup. "Signal the fleet commanders," she ordered. "All ships are to report ready for immediate deployment. We launch the final offensive in 72 hours. "Admiral," Torres said carefully, "our force estimates indicate we're still outnumbered nearly 3 to 1, even with our technological advantages." "Captain," Chen interrupted, "the Devourers have made one critical error in their calculations. They assume we're trying to defeat them using their rules, fighting a war of conquest and occupation. But that was never our intention. The main display activated to show a comprehensive view of Devourer territory, with key installations marked in red and primary population centers highlighted in deeper crimson. The scope of the enemy's holdings was vast, spanning hundreds of star systems and encompassing billions of corrupted worlds. "Our mission isn't to conquer their territory," Chen continued. "It's to eliminate their ability to exist in this dimension. Every installation, every corrupted world, every trace of their presence must be completely sterilized. We're not fighting a war. We're conducting an extermination." The bridge crew exchanged glances, understanding the full scope of what their admiral was proposing. It wasn't enough to defeat the Devourer fleets or capture their strongholds. Every world they had touched, every system they had corrupted, would need to be rendered completely lifeless to prevent any possibility of regeneration or adaptation. "The civilian populations on those worlds," began Torres hesitantly, "ceased to be civilians the moment they were converted," Chen replied with cold finality. "Intelligence reports indicate that conversion is irreversible. Those beings are no longer the species they once were. They've become extensions of the Devourer consciousness. Saving them is impossible. The only mercy we can offer is to make their end quick." 3 days later, the largest military fleet in galactic history assembled at the edge of Devourer territory. Nearly 2,000 dreadnoughts, supported by tens of thousands of smaller vessels from dozens of species, prepared to launch humanity's final gambit against an enemy that had never been defeated. The fleet was organized into 7 massive strike groups, each one targeted at a different region of Devourer space. The plan was simple in concept, but staggering in execution. Simultaneous attacks on every major Devourer installation, overwhelming their ability to coordinate a response or adapt their defenses. Admiral Chen addressed the combined fleets from her flagship, her words transmitted to every ship in the armada. "Warriors of the galaxy," she began, "today we end a war that has consumed countless civilizations and threatened the very existence of intelligent life in our dimension. The enemy we face cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, and cannot be allowed to continue existing." The main display showed real-time tactical information as the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. Each strike group would emerge simultaneously in their target zones, beginning the bombardment immediately upon arrival. "Our weapons are simple but effective," continued Chen. "Our tactics are straightforward but devastating. We will not attempt to match the enemy's sophistication. We will overwhelm it with superior firepower and absolute determination. The countdown reached its final moments as hyperspace generators throughout the fleet charged to full power. Thousands of ships prepared to jump simultaneously, coordinated by quantum communication arrays that would ensure perfect timing across all 7 strike groups. The Devourers have learned to fear human determination, Chen concluded. Today they learn why that fear was justified. The jump to hyperspace was unlike anything in the annals of galactic warfare. 2,000 of the largest and most powerful warships ever constructed tore through dimensional barriers simultaneously, their passage creating gravitational distortions that would be detected by astronomers for centuries to come. Strike Group Alpha, commanded by Chen herself, emerged in the heart of the primary Devourer territory. The target was the massive dimensional gateway that threatened to bring unlimited enemy reinforcements into their galaxy. Around them, the other strike groups appeared in distant star systems, beginning their own campaigns of systematic destruction. The battle that followed lasted 18 hours and involved energies sufficient to ignite dead stars. The Devourers threw everything they had at the attacking human fleet, including weapons that violated several fundamental laws of physics, ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, projectiles that traveled backward through time to strike targets before being fired, and energy beings that could possess and control enemy vessels through psychic domination. None of it mattered. The human fleet had prepared for exotic attacks by developing the most mundane defenses imaginable. Their ships were protected by centimeter-thick armor plating that couldn't be possessed because it lacked any form of intelligence to subvert. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles that followed ballistic trajectories, unaffected by temporal manipulation because they existed in simple cause-and-effect relationships. When a Devourer ship attempted to phase shift to avoid incoming fire, it found itself materializing directly into the path of a relativistic projectile that had been fired minutes earlier at the predicted emergence point. When enemy forces tried to corrupt human technology, they discovered systems so crude and straightforward that there was nothing complex enough to subvert. The dimensional gateway fell to sustained bombardment from 17 Titan-class dreadnoughts, their combined firepower sufficient to crack the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The massive installation, which had taken the Devourers months to construct, was reduced to its component atoms in less than 3 minutes. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as human-led strike groups systematically destroyed every trace of Devourer presence they could locate. Corrupted worlds were sterilized by orbital bombardment, adaptation factories were reduced to cosmic dust, and enemy fleets were atomized by weapons that operated on the most basic principles of physics. The Devourers fought with desperate fury, throwing away the tactical sophistication that had served them so well against other species. But desperation couldn't overcome the simple mathematics of superior firepower, applied without restraint or mercy. By the end of the 18-hour campaign, Devourer territory had been reduced from half the galaxy to a handful of scattered installations hiding in deep space. Their ability to corrupt and adapt had been rendered meaningless against an enemy that refused to use anything sophisticated enough to be subverted. "Final casualty reports," requested Chen as her battered fleet began the journey home. 47 dreadnoughts destroyed, 312 severely damaged, reported Captain Torres. Council fleet losses were proportionally higher, but still within acceptable parameters. Enemy casualties. She paused, consulting her instruments. Complete. No significant Devourer forces detected anywhere in the galaxy. Chen nodded wearily. The price had been heavy, but the war was over. The Devourers, who had seemed unstoppable just months before, had been eliminated as a galactic threat through the application of overwhelming force and absolute determination. "Signal the Council fleets," she ordered. All ships are to begin systematic sweeps of their home territories. Any trace of devourer influence is to be immediately reported and neutralized. We cannot allow even the smallest remnant to survive and begin the cycle again. As the human fleet limped back toward friendly territory, the representatives of the Galactic Council found themselves grappling with a new reality. The war was over, but its conclusion raised troubling questions about the nature of power and the willingness to use it without restraint. High Counselor Ralmoth transmitted a message to Admiral Chen from his distant homeworld, his ancient consciousness struggling to process what humanity had accomplished. Admiral Chen, on behalf of all species in the galaxy, we offer our gratitude for ending the devourer threat. However, I must ask, what are humanity's intentions now that you possess the most powerful military force in galactic history? Chen's response was immediate and characteristic of her species' directness. High Counselor, humanity has no interest in conquering or ruling other species. We built these weapons for a single purpose, to defeat an enemy that threatened all intelligent life. Now that purpose has been served, and the dreadnought fleets will be decommissioned and converted to peaceful purposes. The galaxy has seen enough destruction. It's time to focus on rebuilding what was lost and preventing future threats from arising. The process of demilitarization took nearly 2 years to complete. The massive dreadnoughts were gradually converted into mobile construction platforms, their powerful engines and stellar-scale manufacturing capabilities redirected toward rebuilding the civilizations that had been damaged by the Devourer War. Within a decade, the galaxy was more prosperous and unified than it had ever been. The shared trauma of near extinction had forged bonds between species that had previously viewed each other with suspicion or indifference. Trade flourished, technology was shared freely, and exploration expanded into regions that had been deemed too dangerous to investigate. And in the small solar system where it had all begun, humanity continued its quiet existence, content to be remembered not as conquerors or overlords, but as the species that had saved the galaxy by refusing to accept the impossible. The war was over. Life could begin again.